Okay, I'm going to talk about Alex O'Connor here, formerly Cosmic Skeptic, talking to some Christians about very specific instructions that God gives Christians in the Bible to commit genocide. And I think he's interesting because he's very interested in philosophy and he's an atheist, but he used to be a militant atheist like me, but he's no longer militant. And I think he might have even called himself agnostic recently. So, but he has really legitimate criticisms of religion, even though he fully has some respect for it, which is the same as me. So let's get into it.
Do you think that this grace, this omnipotence, this love and charity of the Old Testament God is expressed in the instances where he commands the complete obliteration of entire nations of people, including the women and the children and even the animals, at multiple points throughout the history of the Israelites trying to conquer their holy land, which is promised to them by God, such that if anybody is already living there, they're driven out. And if they refuse to leave, they're chased out and they're killed. And then they come back and they kill the women and the children. Do you think that this is the same graceful, loving God that's issuing these commands?
In theory, it is.
No. Instead, I think we've got to read very carefully. First point, do I allow God to judge? In my culture, that's unacceptable. And yet the Bible insists God does have the right to judge. Second point, is exaggeration being used?
That's not a good defense.
Is hyperbole being used in a lot of those passages? Yes, it is. Because clearly, obviously, many of those people who were supposedly all wiped out appear in the next book. So you know that they weren't all wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, you look at the archaeological evidence for Jericho and Ai, and you begin to realize those were probably smaller fortresses. Yes, Rahab was in there as a prostitute, but those were not just...
Maybe it wasn't genocide. It was hardly any people, man. Some of them survived.
Families and women and children. Those were fortresses that were protecting the families that lived out in the countryside around them. Next point is, I think that there is not the emphasis on individualism in the Old Testament that we have in our culture.
Yep.
And yet, the more we struggle through children of alcoholics
True.
and realize that there are real consequences that stretch down through the generations. And I think the Old Testament does present a picture that we are more interconnected than we as American individualists would like to admit. And when God judges a people group, yes, some innocent people are swept along in the judgment. And that bugs me. I don't like that. And yet that is part of, I think, what the Bible is talking about when it says we're created in the image of God, meaning that we do have free will, which means there are consequences to my decisions that affect my children.
But that's stupid. It reminds me of that idea I've been talking about in my series on Foucault's book, History of Sexuality, where this idea of perversion that started in the Enlightenment, created by the institutions of science, religion, and government, is that if you're quote unquote a pervert, which is anything that's not like traditional missionary sex between a man and a woman, then it means that you will be infertile, and if you're not infertile, your children and all your descendants will be corrupted and impure and that sort of shit. Like, that's the sort of fucking unbelievably childish, emotionally reactionary morality of the Old Testament God.
That affect my grandchildren. We're more interconnected than we would like to admit. So no, those children are not being punished for anything they did wrong, but yes, they're born into a cursed, messed up world, and there are consequences to that. I mean, I benefited from going to Davidson College, and a lot of people sacrificed to put Davidson together. You benefited from going to Oxford University, and there are a lot of people who have...
Yes, people are born in very different circumstances, but that doesn't mean that you can compare going to college to people being killed in mass genocide.
Over many years, given sacrificially to build that. So there are real consequences that stretch down through the generations of our decisions. And also, the Bible never says that those children and all those people go to eternity separate from God. I'm convinced that we will see those children in heaven if they were killed
Hopefully.
before an age of accountability. So the justice
Whoa,
of
whoa,
God.
whoa, whoa, wait a second. They won't go to heaven if they were killed after the age of accountability. So if they would not go to, if by your own logic, then if they were not guilty of their own accountability, but they were murdered of not their own accountability, and then they're accountable for someone's actions by them not going to heaven for something that's no fault of their own, that just doesn't make any sense. And it's why God gets a double standard by some Christians in the Bible. And you don't have to have this old fashioned religious worldview. You can have like a religious worldview that makes more sense, like that of Richard Rorty and Gianni Vattimo talking about a godless religion with no metaphysics and no tenets, right?
God will ultimately triumph.
Yeah.
But do I have problems with the text? Yes, of course I have problems with the text. I don't understand it exactly. I don't understand what God is doing exactly there, why he says that kind of thing. But I'm also convinced that hyperbole is being used. And I think that's a very important thing. For instance, when I was in high school, we used to say, we're going to kill the opposing team.
I mean, to be fair, like biblical literalists who take things in the Bible literally, they're wrong. So you shouldn't take things literally. But he's talking here about like, we're gonna kill the team. The difference between that and we're gonna genocide this people, but we're not gonna actually genocide the mice also, because I didn't mention that.
That we're going to play that weekend, not meaning we're literally going to kill them. And the whole idea of in the Hebrew herem, Herem, of clearing out these people from the promised land. The whole idea that God had given them over 400 years to repent, and they had chosen not to, and now God clears them out. You know, I think it's a complex issue, more complex than the person would allow it to be, who just says, I just can't believe that God would do something like that.
Like, what kind of...
I can. And it's fucking terrible.
Instruction had these people been given, you know, like the people of Ai, the people of Jericho, the Canaanites? I mean, did they have Jewish prophets coming to them and saying, you should repent of your ways, or were they just sort of expected to work it out on their own?
Fascinating question. I'm not sure. I do not know. Obviously, they have consciences. We all have consciences.
Yeah.
And when you study ethics from around the world, it's amazing that it seems we're all like reading off the same sheet music.
Yeah.
And there's more and more research coming out too on just how bad these people groups really
sure
were.
right
I'm seeing more of this.
Child sacrifice.
Canaanites out. Yeah, exactly. It just gets worse every year. Like how bad is it going to get? And so, but the second one, have you wrestled with this being a really culturally conditioned question?
Oh, absolutely.
The Chinese don't struggle with this one.
Yeah.
And when I've talked to people of other cultures and I've brought it up and been like, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
That God judges in that kind of way.
It's so much worse because it's not just like culturally relative. Like I'm a moral anti-realist. I don't believe in the existence of objective moral values.
Yeah, like I'm kind of with Alex on that one, really, especially with what I've been talking about with post-structuralism lately. And for a long time, I think, and in terms of moral foundations theory, like what Jonathan Haidt talks about, which I've mentioned many times before, everyone just has a moral compass, and it's just intuitive. So it's not like reality doesn't even really matter, or our like well laid out moral system doesn't really matter, because it's just based on our intuitions. That's why most people just are against murder, because people just know, I don't know, like pretty much evolutionarily speaking, that a society doesn't work if you go around murdering everyone, etc.
Values, right? And so, like, what could I possibly be meaning here? But I don't wrestle with it, because my job here isn't to say that this is wrong. My job is to say something like what Lincoln said of slavery: if this isn't wrong, then nothing is wrong. If there is such a thing as objective morality, I find it very. I mean, look, we just condemned the Canaanites in part for they were killing children. Well, that's exactly what.
Yeah, that's like to make Alex's point there too. You don't have to like have a strict moral compass to say genocide is wrong. Like You don't have to be a moral realist to say, I don't like genocide, it shouldn't happen. That sort of thing.
What God ordered the Israelites to do when they came into their nation. And we say, okay, well, these people were sinful, idolatrous, and they should have repented. Well, the same is true of the Israelites. They were sinful, they were idolatrous. And yet they had the benefit of having the prophet of God come to them with literal stone tablets telling them what to do. And even then it took them a few tries to get right. The Canaanites didn't have that. And yet when the Israelites are sinful, they get a prophet who comes and sets them straight. When the Canaanites are sinful, they get obliterated, they get exterminated, they get chased out.
Just the same way
God is a double standard. Didn't give the Canaanites a warning and wiped them all out and gave the Israelites multiple chances, like he said.
The Israelites were at first the hands of the Assyrians and then the Babylonians.
True, but it was wrong for the Assyrians to do that. It was wrong for the Babylonians to do that.
Yeah, but the Old Testament insists that that was part of God's judgment on the Israelites for them doing the child sacrifice, temple prostitution, idolatry. God, so it's not...
That doesn't mean that they deserve to be killed by genocide. Even if people are doing really fucked up things, you shouldn't, like, wipe out an entire fucking race of people in a particular place, obviously. Like, even if they are doing terrible shit, maybe they should go to fucking prison instead of all of them and their entire families being murdered and they'll never live again, obviously.
It's God's... It gets back to, does God have the right to judge? Yes, he judged the Canaanites, but then remember, a few hundred years later, he judged the Jews, first at the hands of the Assyrians and then the Babylonians.
So I wanted to talk about the hyperbole thing, right? Because maybe we're not talking about killing everybody, maybe...
Well, obviously not, because they were occurring in the next book.
But okay, so,
man.
For example, in the destruction of Ai, 12,000 people fell that day, all the people of Ai. That's what's said in the book of Joshua. Now, maybe all the people of Ai is like an exaggeration, but 12,000 people is pretty specific. It'd be a weird thing to be doing as hyperbole, right? We have a number of people, 12,000 people. We know it's men, we know it's women, we know it's children are slaughtered. We know that that's not hyperbole. We know that thousands of men were killed. We know that I should quite, I don't want to get this wrong. Perhaps we should look at the text. Yeah, so in Joshua chapter 8, when Israel had finished killing all of the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all of the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 people fell that day. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. So we know that women are being killed, non-combatants are being killed. We know that there are thousands of them. We also know that there were people who had left. They'd run into the wilderness. They were out of the promised land, but the Israelites chased after them and then killed them in the wilderness. And it says all of them were put to the sword. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe that some of them ran away. Maybe all of the ones that they captured were put to the sword, but some of them managed to actually run away, and those are the people who show up in the next chapter. But it's only because, for want of trying, that they managed to survive. But maybe it is just hyperbole. But we know that 12,000 people were killed. We know that the Israelites then turned around after killing the fleeing combatants, came back into the city and killed who's left. Well, who's left? The women, the children, the disabled. So even if there's some hyperbole being involved here in terms of the complete destruction, maybe it's not a genocide, but it certainly still seems to be the kind of military practice which, if done today, would see condemnation and a lot more from the United Nations. In 1 Samuel, there's this. Again, I should read the text to be sure, and I do have it written down. This is the destruction of the Amalekites. God issues the command now. Go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to the death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Of course, this can't be literal because it's not just the camels and sheep and the donkeys. Oh, but you can leave the, you can leave the pigs or whatever. Sure, this is sort of like slightly rhetorical language. But it's very clear, like, leave alive nothing that breathes. Kill the men, kill the women, kill the animals, kill the cattle. And in fact, when Saul decides at the end of the battle to keep alive the king, take him as a hostage, and also keeps alive some of the animals to sacrifice, to slaughter as a sacrifice to God, what happens? He's condemned. And God says, or the scripture says, that God regretted that he made Saul king. He regretted that he made Saul king because he didn't follow his command. What command didn't he follow? That after wiping out the Amalekites, he refused to also kill all of the animals, and he kept the king alive as a hostage. And that
God didn't like him because he wasn't bloodthirsty enough for God's taste.
Enough for God to say, I regret that I ever made Saul king because he didn't follow my commands. And so I understand that there may be some hyperbole involved here, but in the case where Saul is punished, specifically not for killing all of the animals, it's hard for me to imagine like how much scope there is for hyperbole here in terms of undermining the criticism that we are talking about the slaughter of innocent people here.
It shows the importance.
Yeah, I'll stop there. It's a really interesting clip. Watch the whole thing. Very worth watching for sure. But yeah, this is an interesting topic. Like, and Christians have different views on this too. Does God command genocide in the Bible? It seems pretty fucking clear that God does. And then you're looking at it in comparison to historical fact, and some of what happens in the Bible is historical fact, but some of it is exaggerated. So there probably was a genocide there. Maybe the numbers were exaggerated, and you don't have to believe that God commanded them to do that. But whether you do or not, that's a moral issue in the Bible. Like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be a Christian, or anything necessarily, but if you want to be religious, and specifically if you want to be a Christian, maybe that's something that you should think about and try to see if you can reconcile it with your religion. Because a lot of Christians, they're okay. They're they're not okay, but they allow that sort of shit because they like the overall message of Jesus and shit. And Jesus is a laudable figure. Jesus was cool. I don't know about Christianity, but Jesus was cool. Anyway, yeah, very interesting thoughts on the morality of genocide in the Bible and whether God commands genocide or not, and whether what is to be done or said about that.